We're recording now. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first thing that it says for us to talk about is to briefly describe your physical or cognitive domain intervention assignment, which is funny because we were on the same group for that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess we'll just talk about this for Sister Huppiker. But we did a physical domain, and we talked about obesity, and we did a PowerPoint. And the intervention that we did was MEND, and I'll let you.
Yeah. Yeah. We worked on that together. So one of the things that I really liked about that intervention was that it kind of included the whole family. So it was. Um, so in each of our discussion posts, we kind of talked about who the intervention was for, and with an obesity problem in children, it's important to include the whole family in the change process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so on the intervention thing, I'm going to review it. We talked about MEND, which was, so M stood for mind.
Yeah, I actually have it pulled up. Here, I'll read it real quick. I had it pulled up. Yeah, the MEND program, so the M stood for mind, which is a focus on building good self-esteem, help children learn how to set goals. And then the E in MEND was for exercise, and it talked about including 1 hour of exercise daily and alternating different types of exercise. And the N stood for stood for nutrition. So reaching weekly targets, understanding food labels, family eating healthy meals together. And then the D stood for do it, which is just to be consistent. And that's the point where it talked a lot about how working as a family was really the key to success there.
So the part that I did, and then Hallie's part that I helped with. So I talked about how to determine if your child is overweight or obese, and I thought it was really interesting that each country has a different standard for what they consider obese or overweight, and
Yeah.
it's just so if your child is in the 85th percentile or above, they are considered overweight. And if they're in the 95th percentile or above, they're considered obese. And so when you take your child to the pediatrician, at least here in Rexford, for my daughter, when I take her to the pediatrician, they always print out, like once they got her weight and her height, they print out what her percentile is in relation to all the other children that age, that are her age. So they do it based on age. But there's also a lot of factors to account for, such as height and just like developmentally where they're at. So especially for infants, I know we're talking about for children, but for infants that are premature, they're going to be in that underweight for at least until they're 2 when they can catch up developmentally. And then some of the barriers that we talked about to the MEN program or to that intervention specifically was um, friends. So if the children they either didn't have friends or the friends that they did have weren't active. They didn't participate in physical activity a lot. The next one was a safe environment, and I'm kind of saying these out of order, but a safe environment, so where they have a big enough backyard that's safe, so they don't like possibly offend, so they don't have to worry about their children getting hurt. And then the first one that we put, the last one that I'm listing was family dynamics and support. So a lot of single parents said that it was really hard to worry about nutrition and to worry about health when they were worrying about household chores or splitting up their responsibilities when they only had just themselves. And yeah, so the one of the things that we have to try and work through with it just being the nice era is that we will, where it says 2 minutes each for each person. Normally it would be like 6 minutes, or so we gotta have to kind of stretch that out to be an hour.
Right. I think because there's just 2 of us, it might be okay if the meeting's a little shorter too, probably, right?
I guess so. I don't know. Because I think in some groups, are all groups 3 people, or some
Yeah,
of
I
them?
don't know. It seems like our group's pretty small, but
Was she split? I don't know. I think because Katie Paulson, who's normally in our group, I think she's 2, but I couldn't remember. Okay, and then when we get to the part where Shelby had emailed us, we can read her section.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so
So the next,
overall for, oh, go ahead, sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna go to the point. So if you want,
I was just gonna say overall, I think we did enough discussion on our physical thing. I think we did a great job on that project. So
so the second one is to describe your social emotional domain intervention. So what you did, what you studied, and state if you actually implemented the intervention personally, and then discuss the effectiveness of it. If not, discuss research or other evidence that assesses the effectiveness. So, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
um, if you wouldn't mind going first on that one.
Yeah, no problem. So, I did mine on emotional abuse, and so I researched specifically what is emotional abuse because it's not as listed or it's not as easy to determine as physical abuse or verbal abuse. So, um, what emotional abuse is, it's designed, any abuse actually, is designed to control or subjugate another person. And you can either do that with fear, humiliation, verbal or physical assault, and then also the emotional. So, emotional abuse, being self-explanatory, is emotional in nature, and you can emotionally abuse someone verbally with intimidation, manipulation, or refusal to ever be pleased, to ever be satisfied with whatever the person is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, emotional abuse is a brainwashing technique that wears at the victim and their self confidence, self worth, and trust in their own perceptions. Like they start doubting what they believe themselves. And this can be done with berating and belittling. And there were three types of emotional abuse tactics that the website that I looked at explained. And the first one was aggressing, and that's like name calling, criticizing. And you can criticize or name call under the guise of teaching or guidance or trying to help the person, but really you're just like, judging them and invalidating them. The second one is denying, so distorting that person's sense of self-concept. Like, you never said that. You just made that up. No, I don't ever say stuff like that. Or withholding emotional things. So they refer to this as the silent treatment for when you're punishing someone emotionally by not even acknowledging them. And then the third one is minimizing, which is a less extreme form of denial. It means, or it's, so it's like saying, oh, you're too sensitive, or you're being too dramatic. It's not that big a deal. And so the intervention that I studied for it was counseling because that's what they recommend for that. But it's only effective if the victim is open and willing and honest, like completely honest. Because a lot of times emotional abuse victims won't be as open about it because they either don't know the extent of it or they're just trying to make it not seem as bad as it is. Um, and some other things that go along with the counseling that psychiatrists recommend is journaling, and then you can do individual group therapy. So, as a person, like the person responsible for it, it can be anyone. It could be a neighbor, a parent, a friend, a relative, a teacher. But for those people that are responsible, you need to educate yourself so that you can see signs of emotional abuse in other people. And so for the intervention of counseling, it helps you understand your emotions. And so I'm supposed to talk about if I've implemented this myself
Mm-hmm.
and discuss effectiveness. So,
Okay.
um,
I thought I'd just let you know that I am looking at you. My camera, it has to come out at a weird angle, so even though it looks like I'm looking away, I'm actually looking at you. Just so you know,
okay,
I'm
I
not
was
looking
saying
far away.
you're fine. So personally, yes, I have implemented this with myself, meaning that so I grew up in a really hard like home life. I grew up with my stepmother, my stepsister, and my half sister.
Uh-huh.
And my dad was there occasionally, but it was more like It's kind of like a Cinderella story in that my stepmother and father got married, and then my father left the home situation, and so I was treated a little differently than my stepsisters. Um, and emotionally, I was always told like I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't as good as my sisters, or that my value wasn't as um, good. And there was some other types of abuse in there too. But I did go to counseling when I came to here to school at BYU, Idaho, and it was really effective because I didn't understand completely the distortion that had happened or my perceptions because I really thought I was this terrible person and that like I was just a bad person and I really wasn't. And so I took counseling, but I was willing to do it. I didn't take it at the suggestion of another person. I just did it on my own because I saw that I needed that in order to have more successful relationships in the future so that I would know how to regulate emotions, not regulate emotions, but that I could understand that okay and everything. So, yes,
That was
I
good
would
of you to
say,
be able to look for it yourself, and I'm sure that helped for you to be able to be honest, like you were saying before, because you were the one initiating it.
yeah. So that worked in itself. And I only went to a semester of counseling, so 2 months of counseling before I got married, so that I just because I was a little worried, like I don't know, I was just worried that
Yeah.
oh I don't know if I am like valuable enough to be married kind of thing.
Oh.
Which sounds stupid now, but right like a few years ago, it made total sense. So
Yeah.
I agree that that intervention is successful. So what was your
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's good that you have such a personal experience with that. Is it okay if I go now?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, so the topic that I researched was sibling relationships and like sibling rivalry specifically. And I feel like that was a good one for social and emotional development because that's really where we begin to form our relationships and learn what's appropriate and what's not is by experimenting with our siblings, basically. So a lot of the research that I had, let me pull it up real quick. Um, I found a couple different sources that said some things that were pretty similar. They talked about how prevalent of a problem sibling rivalry is. They talked about how if you search sibling, the first word that's going to be attached to it is rivalry. So, so it's a pretty big issue. And a lot of the things that I found had similar ideas on interventions. Um, sorry, I'm just pulling it up real quick. Well, first of all, they talked about a few different reasons as to why siblings fight with each other. And one of the reasons that they talked about was just boredom. The kids are just bored, so they just start fighting with each other. And the other reason was, and the main reason which parents can make a difference in, is attention from the parents is why they're fighting with one another. Then another one of the reasons that both of the research mentioned was that some kids, they want companionship, but they just don't know how to get it from their siblings. So they want that friendship and that social interactions, but they're just not sure how to get it from their siblings. And another one of the reasons, the fourth reason is they may be trying to get power over the other siblings. So it's kind of like a social experiment in how to gain power over someone else. And so then they talked about intervention next. So a few of the steps they talked about was to stop the action between the two siblings because you don't want your siblings, your children, to be abused by each other or anything like that. So you've got to stop the action right away. You've got to listen to each of their stories. So get each child's point of view, identify the problem, and then list ways to solve it, and choose a solution that meets everyone's needs, and carry out the plan. A few things that it suggests is letting the siblings express their feelings, And a big thing that a lot of them talked about was don't compare your siblings, I mean the children, with each other. So don't say, oh, Jane is good at this, and be really careful to avoid comparison. And it also talked about to teach we need to treat our children fairly, which doesn't mean equally. So if you've got like you got to kind of tailor to the child's needs. So if you've got like a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, you don't necessarily say, here, you both have the same amount of grapes, so don't fight because you have the exact same number of grapes. Or, oh, you both have the same toys, so you shouldn't be fighting. But say, oh, well, Jane is going to eat 5 grapes. How many would you like to eat? You know, and that type of thing was what they suggested. They also suggested, there was one other bit of information they thought was really good. They say don't take sides in a fight. Oftentimes the parents will say, well, we'll get after the older one and say, oh, don't hit your younger brother, or don't, leave Jake alone, or whatever. But they said, instead of saying, Jake, leave her alone, say, I see 2 kids that are fighting. That's a problem. And another thing that they suggested is to, as often as you can, obviously you want to make sure your children are safe, but as often as you can, try and let them work out their differences on their own and kind of coach them into solving their own problems, because these sibling relationships are kind of our first emotional, social interactions that we have. So, did I answer all the questions that they had?
Yeah. So, or just say like if you implemented the intervention personally.
Right. The reason I researched this is because I'm the youngest of a family of 5, and I always find it interesting to discuss with my husband what kind of different things we see as adults that we have, that we wonder if it's because of sibling rivalry. My 3 oldest siblings are still really competitive with each other, so it was an interesting topic to me. And also I'm pregnant with my 2nd child, so I wanted to make sure I was educated on the topic so that my children can be friends with each other. So I'm going to implement it. Oh, thank you.
So then the next section of what we need to do, and then we can spend 3 to 4 minutes each on this, is share highlights from our domain interviews. So I was thinking, what if we split it up and talked about our physical interviews first, and then our cognitive interviews, and then just 15 minutes each on each section.
What was that? I'm sorry, you're cutting out again.
So we need to just briefly share highlights about the domain interviews that we did.
Oh, okay.
That's just what we put on the discussion board.
Okay.
So I can go first, and I'll just do physical first. So just quickly, the highlights that I did over that was, so I did obesity, which we did do as one of the main assignments, but there are a lot of resources. The intervention that I put was to limit screen time to an hour a day, and then play outside at least 4 times a week, or 4 days a week. The next one was physical abuse is a risk, but one of the strengths is there are already programs in place. Intervention, you need to contact the proper authorities and ensure the child is taken out of the situation. Another risk or problem is bullying. There is a lot of awareness on bullying, and our resources are available. The intervention would be to empower the bullied child to seek adult assistance, and assist the bullying child, the child that is a bully, to get those behaviors. The next one was asthma. It's really common, so there is prescription medication available. You need to reduce allergens in the home environment as much as possible, to, like with your interior decor, so that they're less prone to collecting dust, and the child is prone to getting asthma attacks. And then the last one that I put was secondhand smoke. And now it's better because smoking is kind of seen as a big no-no, like as a society as a whole, not just within LDS. But interventions, you need to decrease the child's exposure to that smoke. Quitting is the best way, but if not, then at least only smoke outside, or only have a designated smoking area outside, and don't smoke out in the park. So what were yours for?
So I actually did not do the physical section for the discussion board, but because I could talk about a few things that I learned from the interview we did beforehand. I interviewed a lady who talked about, I actually interviewed my mom, and she talked about a few of her children, how they developed differently physically. Some of them learned to walk at quite a young age, and some of them learned a little bit later. She didn't get to the point where she had to have physical intervention for any of them, I think, for learning to walk. So maybe that doesn't apply super well. But I learned a lot from the discussion board, but I didn't get my post in on time for that one. I can go on to the cognitive one, though. I'll go ahead and say on the cognitive, if that's okay. Okay. So for the cognitive domain, I put, let me pull it up super quick. I put a few points on this one. Okay. Okay. So for the cognitive domain, I did the 6 to 11-year-old risk problems, so it's like a school-age children. And for one of the issues I discussed was learning disabilities, and I talked a little bit specifically about dyslexia. I said for the strengths and assets, I said children with dyslexia often are creative and have high IQs. These children often struggle to learn to read and struggle early on in school, but if they get the proper help they need, they can be very successful. I talked about for intervention, I said early intervention allows more time for reading on exams and to check spelling and grammar. These type of children are not good at doing copy work, and so for intervention, I think the most important thing is overall understanding of the disability. I put the people that can that the intervention should be directed at would be the school. The school can be a great help in allowing more time for these children on tests and things like that. And the parents can play a huge role in spending extra time reading with the children and things like that. I also put peers because they're going to need peers who are understanding, kind, and understanding of the child's delays. I also, for the next one, I talked about speech delays. I put recognizing the delay early on and having access to help would be some of the strengths. I put a speech therapist specifically would be the best one for the intervention. And I kind of talked a little bit about how having a speech therapist specifically would be very helpful, because I feel like with a speech problem, if the parents try to address it themselves, it can be very frustrating for the parents and for the children if they don't have the proper training like a therapist would. For the last one, I talked about obsessive-compulsive behavior, and I put a strength would be playing into the children's strengths. So, for example, if the child is obsessed with like zoo animals, get the child access to lots of books on this topic, relate math work to the topic, and try and kind of, instead of trying to break them of their habit, kind of help them to use it to their benefit. I put therapy may help the child overcome certain needs, and patience would definitely be needed for a child with compulsive behavior. So I put a therapist and parents, and I also included peers on that one because a child who is obsessive-compulsive is definitely going to need peers who are easygoing and understanding of the child's needs and compulsions. So that's what I put for the cognitive domain.
So I forgot to mention that I interviewed my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law. My mother-in-law she's been a school teacher, she's an educator, but she's also been like a primary president and currently a young women leader. So she's been a teacher in primary and in many aspects, and she's a mother to 7 children. And then my sister, she homeschools, so in that aspect she's a teacher, and she's been doing that for a while. And she has 5 children. And so some of the things that we talked about on the cognitive domain were um, some disabilities that my mother-in-law specifically, but also that my sister-in-law, they run into either like in church settings or with their own children, um, or with like family members, cousins and stuff. So I did Down syndrome. My mother-in-law had a child that had Down syndrome, and the interventions, like the government has a federal early intervention specialist. Schools have programs that will work with you, but you know, a lot of times parents say, "Oh, we can do this." I think you need to have a qualified special needs consultant. They should at least give you some examples of how to stream that cognitive development for your child. The other one was ADD or ADHD, and it's really prevalent today. And so, the intervention was to provide your child with healthy outlets for their like overactive mind. Give them healthy outlets. Don't put too many unrealistic expectations on them, and let them release physically, like exert energy throughout the day, and then have them work on what they want to, what they're drawn to, but within that. And then another risk is autism, um, and then there's curriculum that is designed for children to flourish with autism. And many times autistic children are very intelligent, they just um, certain outlets for their issues. The other one was dyslexia, if you think about dyslexia, and there are many ways to educate yourself about. I have my husband's cousin, she has a child that has dyslexia, and she actually she did a 6 week program, and she became certified in helping children with dyslexia. And so that's a perfect example of a parent trying to get involved with a child and trying to help them out. And the last one I did was the sensory integration disorder, and my sister-in-law, her son, has that. They just feel like sometimes people get really sensitive in some areas to, like for him, he doesn't want to do his touch. So like certain textures of his clothes or of his food will freak him out, and others he like has to have. Another one was like with his energy, he just like get overstimulated, and sometimes he'll hit or he'll just go crazy. Not because he's a bad kid, but because he's just not really using his energy in an appropriate manner. So one of the interventions that they've done for that is just figuring out what needs to be done for him appropriately so that he doesn't have those outbursts. And so before we go on to the next one, I think we forgot to talk about Shelby. I can
Oh,
read
yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you can read it if you would like.
I have it pulled up. So
Great.
Shelby, her risk and intervention that she chose to discuss in the social emotional domain was self-esteem in children. And she says that we know that children are going through so much change and developing, and they're developing at such rapid rates, which makes her believe that self-esteem is crucial during this time of life. Some of the interventions that would help with this risk would be that of positive support groups. The parents could get the child involved with these types of groups where their child can see their talents and their strengths. It also gives the child the ability to be around others who enjoy the same things as they do, which can also help with building their self-esteem. Another intervention that is similar but is more specific is getting the child involved in sport teams. So Carly B. Lutzke and Sandra D. Simpkins, authors of The Link Between Children's Sports and Self-Esteem, mentioned that children who spend more time in team sports but not time in individual sports report higher sport self-concept, which in turn was associated with higher self-esteem than their peers. Of course, interventions could include encouragement from those that are involved with the children, such as teachers, leaders, and other family members. So that is Shelby's intervention and risk. And so the next 15-20 minutes, we should attempt to identify common elements of effective interventions targeted to different problems in different domains. So I think it's just talk about the common things that we see between all three of our things
Yeah.
that are different, or even other ones that we've mentioned previously. And then we'll go from
Right.
there.
I think one of the things that I see that's common throughout most of the discussion boards that we've had on these topics and all the meetings that we've had has been the intervention sometimes includes therapy or includes different level depending on the severity of the situation, but it also always includes the parents. And I think obviously the home is where the children are learning their physical skills, where they are learning their social emotional skills. So I think a lot of times when we think about helping children, we need to address helping the parents to be able to help the children, because just helping the children on their own is not really going to give them all the time that they need as much as helping parents help children, I think is what I was trying to say.
No. And to go along with that, I think so the main key is like knowledge is power, education is key. You give parents those resources that they can use to then help their children. That's going to be the best because, like you said, they are with their child for the most part, and in most of
Right. Like with physical, like with obesity, it's like the parents are deciding what the children eat, and the parents are deciding, since they're kind of making a lot of decisions for the children. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
For like no, you're fine. Or for like the secondhand smoke, even though they're separate things, like obesity, smoke, the parents are deciding to smoke or to put their child in the area where they are susceptible to something. So every word I just want to put when it says who's responsible and why, I just want to be like the parents, because because when you read, I mean, I just wanted to reference the thing we're talking about in all of them, and I did in a lot of them. But because it says that parents have a solemn responsibility for the care, the nurturing, the upbringing of their children, and it needs in all aspects, in the physical domain, cognitive, social domain.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like there are a lot of positive programs that can reach out to parents too, because I feel like as a parent that is struggling giving their child what they need, you know, coming at them like, oh, you're messing it up might not be the best approach, but saying, here, let us give you the help. I know that I've personally seen some great things happen with the WIC program. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I've seen families go in there and they get coaching on how to make healthy choices for their children, and they get checks for healthy fruits and vegetables and for milk for their kids, and I've just seen a lot of good come from programs like that. And you know, it's not telling the children, hey, eat healthy while they're at school when they don't really have a choice of what they eat, but it's more focused on the parents and giving them access to helping their children make those decisions.
Oh yeah, and I think a lot to go along with all the stuff that parents are implementing or that others are implementing with these children that have these risks is, what we read about, I'm pretty sure we read about it maybe last week, talking about the different styles of parenting and authoritative one is the best one where you like give your children choices, but you're like firm, but not aggressive or overbearing or
right, like fair and consistent,
authoritarian. So I think with that, like having an authority, parenting style, that'll probably get the best results for whatever you're implementing. As long as you're on a good relationship with your child. If you're forcing your child to eat broccoli for every meal, that might be okay. Like when we were learning about on the rewards, how the fear will work or the rewards will work for a little bit, but that's not giving them real skills. That's just saying, hey, eat your broccoli or you're going to get spanking.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you there. I definitely agree, too, with what you said earlier about how knowledge is power. I feel like I've learned so much from this class and I took a parenting class before this for my marriage and family degrees, my major, and I can't believe how much it's helped me. My son is only 15 months old, but when they were talking about teaching your children emotional intelligence, I don't know if you remember that. That kind of goes along with the social emotional part. So like being able to properly identify when they're feeling a certain emotion, So like when my son is like having a temper tantrum, instead of just saying stop, don't be angry, or don't do that, I like get down on his level and I say, you're feeling angry, aren't you? And it's amazing how just identifying it and saying I understand, he like calms down. And I'm like, I never thought that would work in real life. Like, yeah, in a book maybe that would work, but anyways.
I think it's funny. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's funny because I think the same thing too. I have a 10-month-old little girl, and when I'm reading this stuff, which child development is my minor, and I'm really grateful for it because, as I was saying, like my upbringing wasn't super great. I was terrified of being a foster parent, but I really feel like with this resources, like with knowledge and stuff about what things to do or what's appropriate or what's developmentally the best for them, that
Uh-huh.
is the best thing. And even though sometimes I read these books, I'm like, oh, that is a hippie dream.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Never work in real life.
By y'all and talk about our feelings. But when you actually get in them and when you see the good that they do, oh yeah, I totally agree with most of the readings, if not all of the readings or the suggestions that we've read.
Right.
After. Um, So it says to conclude by sharing your best insight or suggestion about effectively intervening to foster development. Just about what we're talking about with the domains, like, and we did mention that I think when we were talking about just educating the parent and but I guess to tie it in with the spiritual domain, which we didn't talk about, but which is I think a part of a child just as much as the physical or cognitive domain
Yeah.
is. And with us being all LDS and stuff, is to have the gospel in your life, and not only that, not just have it out of going to church and stuff, but to have that personal relationship with your Heavenly Father. And when you also foster that in your children to have a personal relationship with their Heavenly Father as well, I think that's when you'll get a lot of guidance. I mean, there are some things that you won't get an answer to in the scriptures. Like the scriptures aren't going to tell you how to help your child that has Down syndrome. But I think
Mm.
if you use those resources, humble, um, just realize that we're here on this life to progress and to not only better ourselves but better our children so that they can have a better chance in their mortal journey here. Then
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked how you mentioned the spiritual domain. I think that's the most important one, and I think also I think a lot of times parents think, oh, well, I'll wait till our kids are old enough to be able to care or notice. But I know that when we have family prayer, and occasionally my son will stop and fold his arms, but like it's pretty rare. But when he does, I can just see on his little face that he recognizes. He looks at both of us and he can recognize that the spirit is there, you know. And I think it's important to go through that step as soon as they're born. You know, they need to be born to a home that's already implementing those um, religious practices, I guess.
yeah, and to talk about the one of the common elements between that and more with our project thing on obesity, just to go with that, if you eat Doritos and cake every day, child, until they're 5 years old, and then start saying, you know what, we are not eating sugar anymore, we're just going to eat healthy fruits and vegetables and grains, that's not going to go over very well, and your child is
Mm-hmm.
going to have a hard transition to that. And it's the same thing with family prayer, family meeting, scripture study, church attendance, all of that. A lot of times people think, well, my child can't even read yet. Why are we having them listen to prayer? Why are we having them listen to scriptures? They don't know. They're not. And really, they're getting a ton of that in.
Yeah, it's setting up the structure too so that it will be a habit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then the final 2 minutes, which we can either. Do you know what time we started?
Yeah, we started at like 1:45, I believe.
45. So
Ish.
we have, no,
And I think since we only have two people, it's okay if we go a tad shorter.
yeah,
It just makes sense. So.
yeah. In the final 2 minutes, we're just supposed to summarize highlights from our conversation that we've had, what we've learned, a summary or whatever, or the conclusions that we've drawn. And this part is specifically for Sister Huckleberry because wish you could put the summary of it without us. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of fluff we throw in also, but this should be like the condensed version.
Okay.
Do you want to summarize first?
Sure. Yeah. I feel like. Sorry, I keep struggling to hear you. I'm sorry. It cut out a little bit during that last part of what you were saying. um, so, so for the summary, I think all the domains, like we've kind of already talked about, you know, focusing on the parents. And one thing we didn't mention that I think was a common theme throughout was being able to recognize the issue and identify it sooner rather than later. That was a theme that I saw throughout all the domains. Early recognition and intervention. And I think, is there anything else you wanted to summarize?
Yeah, so I just wanted to real quick talk about what we mentioned. So at the beginning of it, at the beginning of our conversation on Google Hangouts, we talked about our physical domain intervention assignment. We talked about obesity and the main program and how to implement that. Personally, for the social emotional domain risk, I talked about emotional abuse that would be an intervention in counseling. Sarah talked about siblings and sibling rivalry with the intervention being like parental parent actions or reactions. And then, Shelby mentioned self-esteem and that the thing, main intervention for self-esteem is to get your child involved in support groups, whether that be sports teams or just other play groups where they do their talent. From our domain, we did have a lot of similarities, but we also had a lot of unique things. And we didn't consider Shelby, but we have read hers on the discussion boards, and they kind of go along with ours too, with adding her own insight. We talked about how parents are the main, they have the responsibility of caring and rearing other children, increasing righteousness, and helping them flourish in all domains. Our common elements that we've mentioned have been knowledge, educating the parents or the caregivers. This is another thing that we should clarify is that in some situations, the biological parents aren't always the caregivers for their children. So whether that is family members, a grandparent, or an aunt, or an uncle, or a single parent, adopted parent, foster home, any of any and all of the above, these are applicable to those as well because children do need a parental figure in their lives and they need that stability and support. And so I think our best insight that just to summarize what we talked about was having the gospel in your life and having Heavenly Father as your guidance, your example, and then just as a parent, keep trying, keep going for it. The worst thing to do is give up. And so even if you feel like you're doing poorly and for all of these interventions, just keep trying, do your best, and it'll come. It'll take a little bit of effort. So that was our conversation. Do you have anything to add to it?
That was the perfect summary. You did a great job. I agree 100%. So.
All right. So
nice work.
We will put this on YouTube, and then the write art. Don't forget to write over.
Okay. Sounds good.
Paper King. All right. See you later. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Thanks. See ya.